Now let's turn to some examples. These are taken from page 16 in your book. I'm going to walk through each of the examples here briefly and explain the thinking that goes into identifying the four components of each conjugated verb. I expect that in this homework you will have some questions. The first example on the screen is I talk. This is very simple, and this is often the form that verbs take. Here we have, in order, tense, present, aspect, simple, mood, indicative, and voice, active. Please identify the components in that order, the order which is laid out on page 13. The next example, I have talked. Tense, present. It's the present tense because we look to the first word of the verb to find the tense. Talked seems to be past tense, but we look for the tense of the verb as a whole to the first word. I'll explain some more about this in a moment. Actually, now, let's get to the aspect. This is the perfect aspect. Now, simply put, you know that you have the perfect when you have has, had, or have as the first word or one of the words in a conjugated verb. So we have the word have. Now, have is in the present. We know that because we've just identified the tense. But if you recall, the perfect aspect expresses a duration of time in which the verb occurs. So the duration here is from some point in the past unto or into the present. So I have talked. The sense there is that at some point in the past, you spoke, you talked, and you're continuing to feel in the present the effects of that talking. So that explains the sense in which you might think that the verb is in the past tense, when actually it's not. It's in the present tense, as indicated by the first word, have, and it is in the perfect aspect, as indicated by the word have as well, together with the word talked. This indicates that we're covering a duration of time. The verb covers a duration from some point in the past into the present. The mood is indicative. It is a certainty. There's no wondering about it, nor is it a command. It is a certainty, an expression of fact. I have talked. The voice is active because the subject, I, am the person talking in that instance. If we were to put that in the passive voice, we would say something like, I have been talked, which doesn't make any sense. Often, verbs cannot be put into the passive voice. They don't have a passive expression. As native speakers, or speaking natively, we'd have a sense of which verbs can be rendered in the passive voice and which cannot. Next example, I had talked. Now this is in fact in the past tense, as indicated by the first word in the verb, had. Had is in the past. We look to that first word. It is in the perfect aspect because of the word also had. I had talked. It's perfect because conceptually it covers a period of time. It covers a duration of time. The past perfect, if you recall from our previous discussion, indicates that a verb took place at some point in the past and then also stopped taking place or ceased at some time in the past. So the duration that is covered is completely over with. I had talked. Let's say I had talked from noon until 3 in the afternoon, and now it's late at night. My talking is over with. The duration of time in which I spoke is done. That again is the sense of the perfect. The mood is indicative because it is a certainty, and the voice again is active because I, the subject, am the person performing the verb. I am the person who had talked. Next example, I will talk. This is the future. The future is always indicated grammatically by will. So remember that. If you have a will, you have the future. Future, this is simple. It is a simple action. I will talk. It is a simple action taking place at one specific time in the future. It's indicative because it is a certainty. I will talk. Now don't confuse this with the idea of that short statement. Don't confuse the grammar with the meaning. One might want to say or be tempted to say that I will talk is subjunctive because we're not in fact sure of the fact that I will talk in the future. We can't predict the future with any certainty. However, the grammatical statement is in the indicative mood. The grammatical construction of that statement is a certainty. You'll get used to this, but be careful to distinguish the grammar from the sort of larger general meaning of what's being communicated. Meaning and grammar often work very well together and in a kind of reciprocative way, but just be careful not to overlap the two. They're not the same. So, I will talk. Future simple indicative, and it is also active because the subject I is the person performing that verb. Next example. I should talk. Now this again, remember, is present. It might not seem like it's present. I should seems to suggest the future. And as I was saying earlier in the previous video, it seems to me that it would be the future. Simply put, however, it's not. Just memorize that. A shoulda, woulda, coulda verb, which you know is a subjunctive, is always in the present. So if by accident you call this verb future, when you get to the mood, if you see that the mood is in fact subjunctive, go back to the tense and make sure that you label it present. Because in English, remember, the subjunctive always occurs in the present tense. Always, always. Memorize it and remember it, even if it doesn't seem to make a kind of intuitive sense right now, as it still doesn't, in fact, to me. Present, simple, it's a simple action. Should talk, there's no continuous action. It's not a should talking, sure should be talking, or anything like that. Just I should talk, it's simple. It is subjunctive. It is an expression of a possibility or something that might happen. It's not a grammatical expression of certainty. And it is active. It is in the active voice. Next example is also subjunctive. I want you to see one of these again right away. I would ask. Again, it might seem that it's in the future. It is, however, the present tense. It is simple. It is subjunctive because shoulda, woulda, coulda expresses a possibility. And it is also active. So while I'm on this note with two subjunctives in a row, let me just list a number of words that could be part of the verb that are auxiliaries remember to review that word, which I've not discussed in a video, but that is in your book on page 14, an auxiliary verb versus the main verb. An auxiliary is sometimes called a helping verb. Review that page and know what those are. Anyway, going back to this notion of the subjunctive, two subjunctives being here in a row. Other words that could be auxiliaries, or what we call modal auxiliaries, derived from the word mood, are, for example, we have should, would, could, ought, might, dare, shall, can, and there are a number of others. So keep those in mind. Next example, I was asking. This is the past tense as indicated by was. Was is in the past. It is progressive because it is a continuous action. Remember that hamster running on the wheel. Imagine the I, or me, standing, asking, in the process of asking a question. The progressive, recall, always ends with an ing. It is indicative because it is an expression of fact, of a certainty that I was asking, and it is active voice. The next example, I was asked. This is the past, again, as indicated by the word was. It is simple because it is a simple action in the past. It's completed, it happened once, and it's done. Notice the difference from the progressive. It is indicative because it is a certainty, it is a statement of fact, and it is passive because in this case, the I, the subject of the statement, is receiving the action of the verb. The subject is no longer asking, but being asked something. It doesn't say, I asked, which would be active. It says, I was asked. Recall the example from our previous discussion. I was taken by the bus to school. That statement that probably nobody should ever utter. Anyway, the next example, I had been asked, includes a past, right? We know that it's past tense as indicated by the first word. We know that it is perfect because of the had. Remember, had, have, has indicates perfect. It is past perfect because the verb covers some duration of time in the past that is now over with, that began in the past, and that ended in the past at some point. It is indicative because it is an expression of certainty, and again, it is passive because the subject, I, is receiving the action of the verb. The subject is the person being asked. The subject is not, in fact, asking or performing or doing the asking. The subject is not active. The final example is an imperative, is a command. Recall that a command, ask him, do this, read, run, sit, always implies the subject you, even if the word you is not stated. So in this example, which we just hear automatically as a command, you hear that imperative voice first and foremost. We might be able to add the you if we wanted to for some particular reason. You ask him right now. The you is often added, as I was saying earlier, for emphasis. But remember, Whether the you is stated or not, it is always there and it is always implied. The imperative note is always in the present tense. Commands cannot take place in the future or the past. So that's a good thing to remember as well. If you see an imperative, if you see a command and you know it's a command, even if you haven't gotten to identifying the mood yet, you know it's in the present tense. So the tense here is present. The aspect is simple. Imperatives are always simple. I can't think right now of an example in which an imperative could be otherwise. There might be some, but I haven't been able to come up with one. It is imperative and it is active because the you, the implied, the unstated subject in this case, that is always there, and remember that it is always there. This is very important to remember when we get to sentence diagramming. You is doing the asking. You ask him. Imperatives are always active. Again, I can't imagine a case in which an imperative could be passive. There might be some if we wanted to try to be creative somehow, but I can't think of one. So, for the imperative here, present, simple, imperative, and active. Okay, good luck with the homework and go through step by step. This is a lot of information, but it's very straightforward and just requires slow and careful working through. You'll get the hang of it after you go through these exercises, and then, of course, do them again. Okay, thank you, and be sure to post your homework question this week.